I was, you hear this term all the time, an unreached people group, or, the 1040 window and all those things. When you think about that term, an unreached people group, you gotta really qualify that. So let me ask you this. How many of you know a missionary to the Amish? Everybody know what the Amish is? Those guys that run around in buggies and don't have any electricity, and they live in the United States. Does anybody know a missionary to the Amish? So you know what that is? That's an unreached people group. And it's in the United States of America. So when you say an unreached people group, you're always going to look at that group, and there's going to be a qualifying reason why. I mean, there are missionaries all over the world. And where they're at, and we have missionaries in Zambia, and there are missionaries all over the globe. Yet we can take that very same globe, and we can take our finger, and we can point to places where the gospel has not yet been. There will be people saying, well, Zambia is a Christian nation. That's what it claims. Yes, but you'd have to go there to understand that is a name only. They have a lot of tribalism mixed in religion and zero truth. And even though there are missionaries in Zambia, I can still take my finger and I can point to places in Zambia where there's no church. Now, if I can do that, followed by that will be a legitimate reason. It's either going to be geographical or political or religious. But there will be a qualifying reason. When you look at that map, when you go into all the world and preach the gospel, we're to sit down with pastor or other pastors, we get together and say, let's see how far we've gone as churches. This is what we've given to do. I mean, if we've been given something to do, if you're building a building, you would sit down and see how far that project has gone so you know what you need to do next. But if we would do that with the gospel, we'd sit down with a map, we'd look at that map, and we would say, okay, let's find out where we've been. We'll drop a pen where we've been. All right? Now that we've done that, let's talk about where we've not been. And then let's discuss why we've not been there. Now, the moment you do that, the reason why they're unreached is because it's hard. What's left will not be handed to you. What's left in the places that we need to go with the gospel, there will be legitimate reasons why there's not somebody there already. Language, no Bible in their language. I mean, if you think about it, if you go to a people group that do not speak English, yet there is no written Bible in their language, that's a massive obstacle that's going to slow you down in that process. So the missionaries that we need that are going to go and accomplish these things have got to begin to look more like the ones that we see that started it all out. Yes. And I just want to look at these men tonight and try to draw from this. When I was growing up, I was raised, my mom made sure I went to church. She put me through a Christian school. My father that raised me was in and out of prison, never met my real father. Come to find out, he was half American Indian. My grandmother was 100% American Indian, and I didn't know any of that. But I always just gravitated towards being outside. And I remember growing up, and I loved Mutual of Omaha. Now, that's definitely dating myself. National Geographic, Jacques Cousteau. And I would watch all these shows, and I was interested in that. In fact, if I was lost and going to have a job, that'd be what I want to do. Go work on one of those activities. And then I went to church. And I met people that were very similar to those people. They're not trying to save whales or elephants or rhinos. They had a mission. It was adventurous. There's some danger involved in it. But it had an eternal benefit. Amen. And I looked at those people and I thought, man, they're telling stories that rivet me. I mean, who wouldn't want to see the Red Sea parted? And who wouldn't want to be there when Lazarus was raised from the dead? Or who would not want to be present if you were asked to go back in time? What event would you like to be at? Hey, the feeding of the 5,000, to watch that happen right in front of you as Jesus kept reaching into the basket one after the other and kept handing it out. How fascinating would that be? And what we're missing today in Christianity, churches are trying to figure out, how to reach people and, what do we need to do to get people in? And, I think people need to do is you just need to see a God that can do anything. That works in our life on a daily basis. There's not an obstacle that you'll find in one of these countries, these areas that are unreached, that God cannot overcome that obstacle. And yes, it's going to be a journey. And yes, there's going to be obstacles, and there are going to be days when you don't feel like you can do it, and God shows up and says, yeah, but I'm on your team, and I can do it. Hey, don't worry about how tall that giant is, and don't worry about how big that wall around Jericho is. Do you understand? That's where I excel. That's where I show up. That's my department, and I'm going to take care of that. Well, I want to see these two men here in this story. The first one's mentioned right here, right off the bat in verse 38. And after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jews, but secretly for fear of the Jews. So he was a believer. Now, if you'll read in the other accounts, he did not consent to this. Now, he didn't consent to it, but he didn't openly object to it either. Not yet. This is on the eve of it. He would be involved in he knew people. He ran in those sectors. His job, what he did every day, put him around the very same people that crucified Christ. He heard them talk about it, Pastor. Now, he didn't raise his hand for the vote. He didn't consent to it. He was present in the meetings. He had lunch with the people that were involved in this process. He was a believer in his heart, but he's in the shadows. And you see what kept him in the shadows? Fear. If we're going to be able to accomplish what's left on the map. Man, I grew up in a day and age when, tonight, these were movies. Like you almost want popcorn, right? They are productions, right? When I was on deputation, I told Maggie, I said, listen, you better hope they let me preach. I said, because if we're going to get there on our presentation, we're going to be on deputation for 10 years. No, mine was very lame. I thought, man, but when I grew up and went to church, it was click. And they showed these pictures of these people, people that didn't wear any clothes. They didn't speak English. And they would tell these stories about how God got them into these villages and opened doors. And I just sat there. And there's something inside of me that said, man, if God still goes on those kinds of adventures, I want in on that. Amen. But do you know what holds back a lot of people? Is the very same thing that held him back. Fear. Fear was holding him back. Fear of losing his job. Fear of what his family would think. Fear of what that might cost his family. Fear of telling grandma and grandpa that you're taking a grandbaby all across the ocean. Fear of finances. Fear of health. Fear of the government. Fear of leaving the American dream behind. And fear is what caused him to live in the shadows. There was a part of him that he believed. He was no way going to consent to the death of Christ. He wasn't going to do that. He prayed at lunchtime. He just did it where nobody could see him. He was a believer, but he wasn't living out loud. Enough believer that the Bible knew it and was able to tell us about it. It's documented. But he was very careful with that. He was guarded in how far he served the Lord. Well, if we're truly going, and I do believe that God did not give us a task to accomplish that's impossible. But if we don't have some dreamers, some kids growing up, some young people, or even some adults here today, to just crave more than anything that you want to see God do something in your life, you got to get out of the shadows. You got to walk out in the light. I mean, in order to see the Red Sea parted, you have to put the army of Egypt behind you. And an obstacle in front of you that only God can overcome. And then he shows up. But we as Christians in America today, we don't put ourselves in those kinds of places. I mean, that's the last thing you want to do. But if you do that, and then that's where God is going. He wants to reach those people. And the story that's involved in it, every time he comes in and he does the impossible, then the world gets to see that God is real through us. When those missionaries died in Ecuador, you know what they got to see? A little glimpse. I mean, a tiny little glimpse of the love of Jesus Christ on Calvary's cross. Those men made a pact with themselves. They had a gun in that airplane. But before they got out of that airplane, they said this: we will not use this gun to shoot a single Indian. Because if they die, they go to hell. They shot one shot, a warning shot, and that's it. And they all died on that beach. You know what the world got to see in that story? Jesus. He could have come down off that cross, but he made a promise to his heavenly Father and said, I won't do it. Because if I come down, I lose them. I can't do it. And even though there are obstacles out there, and even though that there is a lot of unknown, he didn't know what was going to happen that night. All he knew is that night he could no longer stay in the shadow. That was one thing for sure that he knew. He knew that he no longer could keep it to himself. His Savior's body's on that cross, and he didn't want those Roman soldiers to defile it anymore. And he had enough clout to be able to walk into Pilate to even get that far. And he walked past all of these men that he ate lunch with, and he said, can you please? He begged for the body of Jesus. He's out now. There's no turning back. There's another guy in this story, but in order to pick that up, we need to go, if you would, to John chapter 3. John chapter 3. And then I want you to look there, John chapter 3, and we'll just pick up in verse 1. John chapter 3 and verse 1. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. The same came to Jesus by night. And he was curious, but again, he's coming to him by night because the people that he ran with, the people that he worked with, would have given him a hard time about meeting with Jesus. So he came to him at night, didn't want anybody to see him. And said unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. And he has acknowledged and admitted that part. Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, except the man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. I would put Nicodemus in that category of being intellectual. He did a lot of reading. And he can't deny that there's something special about Jesus, but he's not bought into this thing completely. And he says this, Jesus answered him and said, Nicodemus saith unto him, How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter the second time in his mother's womb and be born? Now, there's a little bit of sarcasm there. Because certainly he knew that Jesus wasn't expecting him to be reborn physically, go back to a baby. He was saying somewhat, are you serious? You want me to believe in 6 days? Science says otherwise. Same kind of sarcasm. Now, he's not ready to reject the Creator, but he's not ready to buy in this whole being born again thing. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto you that except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. And that night, Nicodemus walked away lost. Then you picking back up in the story, if you would, in chapter 7. And I want you to go down to verse 45. John chapter 7 and verse 45. Then came the officers to the chief priest and the Pharisees. So you see the group that's around them. And they said unto them, why have you not brought him? Why haven't you brought Jesus to us? And the officers answered, never man spake like this man. Hey, this guy's different. Then answered them the Pharisees, are ye also deceived? Have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed on him? And says, you know what they're saying? Don't tell me you bought into this Jesus stuff. Don't tell me now you're one of him and you've got religion. And all of a sudden, the same man that came to Jesus at night says this. Nicodemus saith unto them, and I want you to notice something. It's no mistake what comes next. He that came to Jesus by night. God wants you to know it's the same guy. Being one of them. Doth our law judge any man before it hear him, and know what he doeth? Then they answered and said unto him, art thou also of Galilee? Search and look, for out of Galilee arises no prophet. They're saying, man, Nicodemus, don't tell me. Now, he didn't at this meeting openly declare his faith, but at this point, you can see something's changed. He's actually defending him. He's got enough. I mean, I would even say that this part, now, he very well may be a believer. But he's still in the shadows. Until this night. Because Joseph, and these guys traveled in the same group of people. At some point, Joseph says, I'm going to go get him. Nicodemus also worked around the same group of the people, found out that Joseph is going to go do that, and you know what he says? Well, you're not going to do it alone. I'm going to go with you. Can you hear Joseph tell Nicodemus, listen, no, you'll lose your job. We're probably going to have to move tomorrow. Life will not be the same in the morning. And Nicodemus says the same thing. Joseph says, I can no longer wait one more minute in the shadows. I'm going to let the world know that I believe that man on that cross is the Son of God. So, if you read here, it says, and after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of the Jew, but secretly for fear of the Jews, besought Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him leave. He came therefore and took the body of Jesus. And there came also Nicodemus, which at the first came to Jesus by night, and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloe, about 100-pound weight. May I tell you something? Could you imagine now whether or not they actually took Jesus off the cross, or the Roman soldiers took him off the cross? If the Roman soldiers took him off the cross, I promise you it wasn't done nicely. Now, if they did it, could you imagine how you would take him off the cross? I mean, you're just going to take the nails out and let them flop? Do you understand what they got to see up close? His face just a bloody mess. I wonder if he took his shirt and wiped his cheek off. Pastor, they had to get that blood on their hands. There's no way in the world you could clean that up and not get it on you. I mean, they're no longer in the shadows. They're front and center for all the world to see. You know, at the same time, these two very unseemly men break out into public. The people that you thought would care about the body of Jesus are nowhere to be found. They all left. And at that moment, these two men said, we can't do this. We got to go get him. And really the whole message is this. If we don't start living like this actually means something to us. Like what would you take for your salvation? Well, the obvious answer would be nothing. I wouldn't take anything for it. It's that special. You can't buy it. I'm not going to give it to you because it's special. Well, if indeed my salvation is special, and if indeed a man, and not only a man, but the Son of God died so I can have it, should there be anything that I would not do for him? Now, like them, we can all say that we love him. And we can all make little gestures in our Christian life of dedication. But I think you would agree with me that he is worthy of it all. And that night, they had to overcome their fears. They had to overcome their future. And they had to put all of that in God's hands. If we do not untangle ourselves from the American dream of what this world has told us our life should look like, and start living it out loud for the Lord. And guys, by the nature of who he is, he does not have to do it safe. Every story that you appreciate in the Bible has an element that does not make sense. Throw a rock at a giant. Doesn't make sense. Yell at a wall. Doesn't make sense. Feed 500 people with a little lunch. Doesn't make sense. See, we're trying to make sense of it, of why we should or should not do that. There's no more dreaming. There's no more saying, hey, if you're still into this. I mean, if I can imagine the Apostle Paul coming to a church service and talking about that journey as a little kid. I'd have been back at his table and saying, how can I go with you? When's the next boat leave? I mean, I can't wait to see. I mean, he's shipwrecked. He's on this island of barbarians. He's with a bunch of ex-convicts. What a group of people to hang out with. What a hoot. You know, there's something about that. There's depression like crazy in Christianity today. We got anxiety in our churches and our people that has gripped our young people. There's this idea that you're going to miss out on something. That you're not going to fit in. And all the effort we go so we can match everybody around us, it has no real purpose in life. In the meantime, we are stuck and stagnant in our faith. Because we're not willing to dream. We don't sit away at night and think about what can we do next? What else can we, people say, well, what ministry are you going to, I said, listen, it's as big as you can dream. You care about the addicts? Ask God to help you figure out a way that you can make an impact on them. I mean, ask God at night, what can we do? We want to have a part in doing this. Take us on that journey. You want to motivate your kids? Get them involved in something that challenges them spiritually so that they need to trust in God. Amen. So they need to depend on Him. Because if we're going to actually accomplish what is left out there in the Great Commission, we cannot do it in the shadows. I took It was like 3 trips ago, and on that trip, 2 things happened that kind of changed a little bit of my thinking. So there's one lodge on Lake Tanganyika that we can stay at when I'm taking a group. If I'm there, I can stay in a village. If I got a group, I don't do that. It's one lodge. It caters to scientists and diving because it's a big dive, but it's very expensive to go there. So not many people go there. I mean, for me, and they give me a discount. The plane to go up there is $2,500. Right? So if you're going to go there on vacation, it's going to cost you. So in this lodge, we showed up, and I've been there enough that they give us a really good deal, and I'm very thankful for that. I looked over there, there's a group of people, and I thought, well, who are they? Come to find out, they're from National Geographic. That's when you know you're not in Kansas anymore. When they show up, there's a reason why they're there. So they were the group before the group. They had a $70,000 budget, and their job was to figure out what would be needed in order for the real group to come in and find the mouth of this river. And I sat there, Pastor, and I thought, well, where's our expedition group in fundamentalism? Why aren't we sending somebody out to go find these villages so that the other group can come in? Why aren't we doing that? Then on that same group, I had a guy, the group was full, and then one of my men said, hey, look, I got one more guy that can come. Do you have an open spot? I said, well, who is he? He said, I think you'd like him. I said, do you think does he know what he's getting himself into? He texted back, yes. He said, this guy has summited all 7 summits in the world. He did Everest twice. No, I didn't know this. Our brother over here would know this probably. Do you know how much it costs to climb Mount Everest? I asked him. He did it twice. In fact, his picture's on one of the Discovery Channel things. Because the first time, he didn't make it all the way, so he did it again. $70,000 to freeze to death and then maybe die. I mean, how do you talk to somebody spending $70,000 to torture your body up a mountain? You can't even spend a bunch of time up there. And you very well can die doing it. Man, wouldn't you love to have that guy come preach? If he can sell that to a tourist, well, you can give him the gospel. I mean, how do you convince somebody to spend $70,000? This guy on this trip did all 7 summits. So he's on this trip with me. We're in this village. He's quiet. Get to the lodge. He starts tearing up. He says, can I ask you something? I want you to be honest with me. I said, sure. He says, do you think I wasted my life climbing those 7 summits? All I could think is, boy, I wish I could have got you when you were younger. And you could take that same drive and go to those unreached people group. Guys, if we don't start dreaming, if we don't start trusting, if we don't start influencing our young people to reject the lie that the only happiness is here in America, that there is a joy that comes from serving God, even in the middle of struggles and trials, that you cannot get any other way in your life. There is a satisfaction that comes from trusting Him that you cannot get any other way. And the only way we're going to do that is we're going to have to live out loud. These 2 guys, their life was different. From that point on, it wasn't the same. The next day, they got treated different. But I tell you what, their name is tucked away in this. Right in the middle of one of the most precious stories in the whole entire Bible. These two men who hid in the shadows, they stood up that day. And it's captured for all of eternity right here. You say, well, I don't know if God's not called me to be a missionary. You know, when you talk about, you can apply this very same concept to that. You can apply it right here in serving your local church. Well, it's Saturday and pastor's got something to plan for me and it's nice outside and I wanted to do this. I promise you something. What you invest with Christ will give you way more than this world will ever give you. So I wonder if you'd be willing to do this tonight at this altar. I'm not asking you to say you're going to go to a mission field. I'm just asking you to do this. Would you be willing to pray tonight? God, I don't want to live in the shadows anymore. Amen. I don't want to do that. If there is any way you can use me here in my local church, my finances, my life, I just want you to know that you are worth it. And I don't want to sit here and live my life for me. I want to live it for you. And I promise you this, if you pray that with the sincerity of your heart, the God of heaven, who asks us to pray for laborers, He will hear you. And I promise you, is if you mean that, He'll open that door for you to do that. And if you're here and you're not saved tonight, you can walk out of here hiding that. And you can go to bed the same way you went to bed last night. Or tonight you can step out of those shadows and turn to Him.